Okay, hi everyone, welcome. I'm Tobias Fors. I'm a consultant with Citerus, a Swedish training and consulting company, and I'm speaking today with Esther Derby and Don Gray, who are coming to Sweden just before summer next year to teach their very popular workshop, Coaching Beyond the Team. Hello, Esther and Don.
Hi.
Hello.
So I thought about trying to introduce you guys, but then I thought, I'll just let you guys do the hard work. So
I've gone by many things. I think my favorite title was Agile Anthropologist, in that the study of human systems, how people get together in groups, work together in groups to try and create a product or benefit for society, really falls under the domain of anthropology much more so than engineering or systems thinking. Engineering and systems thinking are useful in the process, but it's really the study of people and how we come together and work together. I did start work as a developer many years ago in control systems. My background is control systems engineer, systems integration. I've done many wonderful things for the last 32 years. Had a great time. I ran across near Jerry Weinberg back in the mid 90s, and that was sort of the impetus to look more at the human side of software development. In 2000, 99, 2000, Esther and I met each other. We were co-hosts of the AYE conference for 13 years, and we noticed we had similar interests but slightly divergent paths and techniques within those similar interests. And I guess 4 years ago or so we started this workshop called Coaching Beyond the Team.
Esther.
Well, I started my professional career as a developer also. And over the years, I've worn many hats. I've done testing because developers used to always test their own code. I've been a team lead. I was a dev manager and an internal consultant. And what I noticed from all of those perspectives was that our work environment has an enormous impact on our ability to be effective. And so I made the switch from working on the code to working on the environment and really focusing on the organizational dynamics. And in some ways, that is what this workshop is about. It's about looking at how can we adapt and adjust the environment so that people can be more successful. And I live in lovely, lively Duluth, Minnesota, which is the 17th largest port in the U.S. Who knew? And we get ocean-going ships even though we're 1,200 miles from the coast.
And Don, where are you based?
I live in a little town called Maggie Valley, North Carolina, up in the western mountains of North Carolina, not far from the Appalachian Trail.
So we're pretty far apart. I'm in Uppsala in Sweden, but through the magic of technology, we can have a conversation today. So the title of the workshop is Coaching Beyond the Team, and I actually picked up on a few quotes that I found on the Coaching Beyond the Team websites. I'll just read them and then we can talk about them. So one quote is short and sweet, pure gold. And another participant says, a very intense 2 days from which you will come away with new tools and insights you can apply in the real world. And a third quote that I liked says, an astonishing amount of insight in 2 days of interaction. So what's the secret here? What is it that's happening in this workshop that's making people so happy about it?
Well, I want to pick up on the thing about you can use this in the real world, because these are things Dawn and I use in the real world. We both use these methods and tools when we're working with clients. So they are things that aren't theoretical. They're things that are practical and will help you immediately if you use them.
And so that's one of the things that we might want to talk about just briefly is you start using these in the workshop. This is an experiential workshop. For those who've been to the AYE conference or PSL, you're familiar with the basic process of you do things, you practice things. We create a safe environment where you have this opportunity to challenge yourself as much as you care to, and actually work, practice, and refine your skill at using these tools. So the workshop is pretty much it's a workshop, it's not a class. And you work in a workshop.
So will you say something about why is that so important? Why not just deliver the content? Why is it so important to have the experiential format in this situation?
It moves the knowledge from the head into the body. So I can read a book on theoretical physics, or read a book on here's a good example: riding a bicycle. You can read all the books you want to on riding a bicycle, but until you actually get on the bicycle and start pedaling, that knowledge does you no good. So what the activities do is they start to build the muscle memory that you will use when you go, oh wait, I could have done that.
Well, I think one of the big advantages of actually working with these tools in a workshop setting is that you get to have someone else who is outside your system and may ask questions that haven't occurred to you or aren't obvious. We also, in addition to the tools, we actually do a couple of simulations where people get to have the actual experience of what it is like to enter a group. They have the actual experience of understanding how structures affect the way people interact. And that, having that lived experience, anchors the learning for people.
What are the things that you were seeing in the real world out there that prompted you to actually come up with this workshop coaching beyond the team?
Well, we both met, and I'll let Don tell his own stories, but we met a lot of people who were hired as agile coaches who, could do a pretty good job coaching one-on-one, asking questions and work with the team and help them understand, agile methods better and how to do a retrospective and so forth. But they stumbled when it came to dealing with issues that were not directly within the team. And we all know that walking up to a manager and handing them an impediments list doesn't really work. Kurt Lewin, who was one of the early people looking at organizational psychology, has a little equation that says behavior is a function of the person and the environment. And I think we're very, very accustomed to dealing with the person, but not the environment. And so this gives people tools to look at the environment and engage with people.
And the environment is what we're finding beyond the team. So that's what the title of the workshop is.
And that so now that we're talking about quotes and people, Deming said that a person's performance is determined by the system to like the 95% of a person's ability to do something is constrained by the system. And that to try and evaluate somebody's performance without understanding the system is insane. You're trying to solve a single equation with two variables, and it can't be done.
So how come we so often run into this? As you said, somebody comes in as an agile coach, they see what the problem is, and they write it down and they hand it to somebody who ought to be responsible for fixing it. How come we end up in that mess? What's going on?
Well, I think to a large extent, people have been taught that's what you do. You write you write an impediments list and you hand it to somebody, and people generally either they feel overburdened or defensive or blamed when that happens, and then they're not so interested in solving problems. They're more interested in making them, themselves feel valuable again.
So there's an expression you use in the description of the workshop, or a metaphor, I guess, which says center, enter, turn. And I know it's from Aikido.
Sure.
Will you talk a little bit about that? What's that all about? Center, enter, turn.
So when we have interactions with other people, with systems, the center, enter, turn metaphor from Aikido says the first thing you have to do is center yourself. That means to be aware of yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, how you currently feel today, how you feel this moment. And part of this becomes self-awareness, and part of it becomes use of self. Once I become centered, once I get centered and can stay centered, or at least keep coming back to being centered, then I can enter into these other places in a way where I can use myself.
So I find that it's really important in any change situation to know where you're standing, to be aware of your feelings, to be aware of your thoughts about the change and your thoughts about the people you're working with. Because when you are in a state of being centered, and it's a dynamic state, it shifts from moment to moment, that's where you can access your best problem solving. And that's where you can have access to empathy, which is really critical for working in this sort of situation. Once you do that, you can enter the client system, enter another group with the hope of understanding something about their challenges, their strengths, how they're viewing the situation. And when you have that, then you can actually turn the situation. Then you can actually make some changes. Unfortunately, most people, when they are coaching or working with an agile team, they start by trying to turn the system. They start by trying to change. So they haven't really made contact with the people they're working with. They haven't really thought about where they're coming from, and that often means that they're coming from a place of saying, "Well, I have the right way, and I'm going to tell you what it is." So we find it's really important to go in that order. Center yourself, enter the system, which can be a group, it can be a team, it can be the whole client organization, and then you can start to turn. And we actually use this as the organizing principle for the workshop. So we start with exercises that are about centering, and then we look at how people enter groups, and then we present a number of methods to actually turn the system or change the system, and by engaging other people in problem solving. We've actually had a lot of managers in the workshop because they have to influence the organization around them too to get work done. We've had some people who are developers. We've had actually a broad range of people. So it's useful from all of those perspectives.
So let's say somebody who's watching this is in a situation where they have entered the system, but maybe not, let's say, in an optimal way. So maybe they started out with a little bit too much expertise and a little bit too much handing over impediment lists. What kind of advice can we give them? Can you re-enter the system in a way? Is that possible?
Sometimes you do get a second chance to make a first impression. And I think one of the keys to that is creating rapport, finding common items that you want to work on, helping solve issues, problems that the client is interested in actually having solved. Quite often, I get sent in initially to fix a team where the team has not really asked for help to be fixed. I didn't even know they needed fixing. And I guess fixing should go in air quotes here. So then the question becomes, how do I, one, repair my relationship with the team, and two, start to create connections with the managers and the people who brought me in to help them see that they're part of the overall dynamics and how they can shift their dynamics and change the results that they're getting from the team.
Where should we start? Should we start with the teams? Should we start with management? Should we start with mid-level management? What's the best way to start this?
The best way is to start where you can. And start where you are. I mean, I don't think there is a perfect place. I think that very often the assumption is it's those teams that need to be fixed. And very often, there's some things that the teams could be doing better, but they're part of a larger system. and how work flows into the team has a huge influence on their ability to get something actually done. So I think you start where you are. It's always possible to make some changes, no matter where you start from. I think it's super helpful to have support of managers, and by support I mean the acknowledgement that they're going to have to make some changes too. That it's not just fixing those people over there.
So what about when people are feeling stuck? That people feel that, well, we'd like to start here, but we're really stuck. It's really somebody else who needs to change. What then? What do we do? What are the tools we can learn and use to get unstuck?
Well, I think you can always change your response. Even if you feel like someone upstream of you has to change something before you can do anything, there's different ways to respond to that. And it might be, going and talking to them and saying, this is the impact this is having on us. Can you tell us why you're doing it this way? Why does this make sense from your point of view? Because when we get it's not quite what we need. So, you can always go have those conversations. You can always change your response.
The other thing you can do is you can share information. Esther raised some questions like, how does this make sense as you're looking at it? Because when it gets to us, it doesn't make sense. And some of the things we do in the workshop is share tools and methods such as shape of the problem, because a lot of times people tend to say, oh, here's the problem and it affects development team alpha, when in reality, if you look at it, it ripples out and affects a lot more people, and then it starts to go out and then ripple back in. And so having, one, the ability and willingness to have the conversation that Esther talked to, and then two, methods and models for sharing information that sometimes is not normally visible.
We're using our visual thinking and that part of our brain, that capacity to externalize problems and externalize points of view.
I'm at a whiteboard using Post-its and a marker. And then the person I'm working with, I get them involved. And so now we're standing side by side facing a white wall instead of across the table from each other talking about stuff in our heads. We can put it on the wall and see, oh, well, I hadn't thought of that. And then they'll put up something and go, well, that makes sense now that I understand. And then you start to build a shared understanding of the problem and how it ripples throughout the organization.
What's the system that we're talking about here, and why is that so important?
Well, I think I think we have a history of thinking about organizations as machines, where they're very well ordered, and if all the parts are fitting together, everything will happen just like a well-oiled machine. In reality, it's not that neat. It's a lot messier, but a system is, a group of things that are interacting together and affecting each other. And it's not so much how one part is functioning, it's how all the parts are interacting. And so we're looking at organizations from a holistic and more organic point of view. Not machines, but more like an environmental, natural system.
As Akoff said, a system is not the sum of its part. It's the product of its interactions.
You mentioned, Esther, that we often speak of organizations as machines. And another thing I picked up from the description of the workshop is that you'll be talking about or working with in the workshop something you call the language of change. What can we say about that?
Well, I think the language that is in the popular literature and that we often hear in when organizations are trying to change, mask the complexity and the messiness of change. We talk about installing a change as if it's just a light bulb we can screw into a socket or a part on a machine. All of these things don't accurately describe what change is like. And because many of these metaphors are sort of negative, they predispose people to a posture that is not necessarily conducive to change. The language we use, because our brains work in metaphor, opens up possibilities and closes possibilities. So I think it's useful to be aware of that and to use language that is more accurate.
Metaphors open possibilities, close possibilities. It establishes frames for thought into actors that are permissible. And so the one I was thinking about recently was Agile Evangelist. I'm okay with people being enthusiastic about
Sure.
what they're doing and the joy and happiness and hopefully better way that we have found in developing software using the Agile mindset. But when I think of an evangelist, and this is particularly bothersome for some people, especially here in the south of the southern part of the United States, because an evangelist means I'm right, you're wrong, you're a sinner, I have the answer, and it usually involved tent meetings in July at night when it was hot and the mosquitoes were out. And so evangelist, just for me, when I hear Agile evangelist, it just pulls this entire set of experiences that I did not find overly nice.
And it's both to be aware of the language that you personally use, and we're not saying don't use metaphors. This is how our minds work. We are swimming in metaphors.
There we go.
That's a metaphor.
It's how our brains work. So it's not to get rid of them. It's to be aware of the ones you use, and also to be attuned to the ones that you're hearing in your organization, because they can tell you something about how the organization is limiting itself. They can tell you something about how the organization faces problems, and that can offer you some opportunity to either open things up or shift the metaphor that people are using.
So there's a lot of stuff being covered here, and I know you extended the workshop from 2 days to 3 days.
We're going to be spending a lot more time on status, because status is always involved when you're offering help, always. So we're going to be spending more time on that, and we're going to be spending more time on metaphor as well. So there are things that we have touched on, but not to the depth that we'd like.
And data.
And we're going to be adding some stuff about data and networks. So
what about data? Let's stick with that for a little while.
So what about data? It's everywhere, and there's various ways of finding data that allow us to view the system differently. For example, we have this thing called velocity in the Agile world, if you're doing some iterative methods such as Scrum. Well, what is the velocity over time? How is that shifting over time? What's the defect count? Well, what's the rate at which defects are coming into the code base? Is it going up? Is it going down? So it's not just having numbers and knowing where to find them. It's different ways of looking at those numbers. And using that information to influence the experiments you may choose to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's always data available in organizations. We're not talking about going out and doing a big metrics program. We're talking about how can you use readily available data to help people see the situation in a different way.
Anything we haven't discussed that people ought to know if they're thinking about maybe coming to the workshop, not quite sure yet?
So one item for me would be through the ongoing theme through all 3 phases, center and return, involves you and something you're currently working with and challenged by. So it's not, we don't come up with, okay, here's a case study. How would you approach this from a thinking standpoint? It's, okay, what is your problem or the opportunity that you'd like to improve? Who's involved? How do you see that? How can you change that? And this all goes home with you. It's all done on flip charts and Post-its. So it's an active exploration of something you're currently working with.
What we've heard from participants is that they have gained significant insights about the situations that they're working in. They've met other people that sometimes they stay in contact with. But it's really an opportunity to increase your toolkit and really gain some insights on how you have been approaching problems and how you can really be more effective and expand the scope and value of your coaching. Plus, we're fun. We're awesome.
The workshop is on May the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of next year, 2017, in Stockholm, downtown Stockholm in Sweden. Really looking forward to having you, meeting you again. Thanks so much for this little chat.
Yeah.
And I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing you in May, if not sooner, somewhere else.
Take care.